All right, good evening. My name is Jen Wesson, and I am the Executive Director of the Head of the School Regatta. On behalf of the Board of the Directors and the Committee 50, we welcome you to our 18th Story Hour. While we spent most of 2023 focusing on the historic events that allowed for the origins and shaping of Boathouse Row, we shifted tonight to a subject that has been on our list from the outset of this initiative, George Pocock, his career and contributions to the sport, the builder of boats, and the mentor to many a boys in the boat throughout his life. With the upcoming release of the movie, we thought it was timely to provide the stories behind the stories and perhaps some historical context you won't be able to find in the book or the movie, but that helps to connect us and enjoy them both even more. So we have some fantastic guest storytellers with us tonight. In order, we have Jim Pocock, the grandnephew of George Pocock. We have Steve Chapin, the builder and restorer of Pocock Racing Shells. They will both speak to George Pocock, the builder, and what makes a Pocock shell a Pocock. We'll also have Nicole Klein, the project manager of the University of Washington Shellhouse Restoration Project. She'll speak to the preservation of the ASUW Shellhouse, the significance of the place, and the space that George Pocock built all of his shells. We also have with us Judy Rance-Willman, the daughter of Joe Rance, who was the seventh seat in the 1936 University of Washington gold medal crew. She will speak about her father and his experience. And joining us also is Al McKenzie. He is our West Coast historian on Pocock boats and everything rowing. So we're happy to have all of them with us this evening. We want this stellar lineup to do most of the talking tonight, so I'm going to keep my intro very short here. But I do just want to remind you of a few housekeeping items to help with our sound and flow. This is our biggest story hour to date. I think we have about 280 registered. So just to kind of keep things moving along and not to disrupt our flow, I'm going to ask everybody to stay on mute. If you would like to use the chat room to enter any comments or ask questions, you can place them there throughout the evening. We will allow some time at the end for folks to come off mute. If everybody wants to check out this chat room now, we'd love to see where folks are from. So you can just type in what organization you're with, what boat club or what city. We'd love to know where everybody's coming from. Again, I've muted everyone to eliminate that background noise. You do have the ability to unmute yourself at any point in time. Just be aware of the background music. All right. I encourage you to use that chat room. Keep it visible off to the side because the chat room allows us to share in those stories that the speakers are providing. And in addition, I just want everyone to know that I'm recording this session, so it'll be available for those that were not able to join us tonight. We will definitely run till 8:15 tonight. We'll cut it right around that time. We have a ton of content. I'm going to turn it over to our evening's facilitator and fellow Committee 50 member Rick Stellick, and he's going to introduce our guests. And again, at the last 15 minutes or so, we'll open it up to some Q&A. So let me introduce Rick because he really has pulled together a fantastic lineup tonight. Rick began rowing in 1962 for Harrison High School. He went on to attend Carnegie Mellon and Wisconsin as a graduate student. He became a full-time sculler and in 1966 joined the Malta Boat Club and has since continued competing at both an elite and master's level for them. He served as Malta's coach for 15 years and also as their president. Now retired after 45 years as a construction manager, he continues to actively support the operations and maintenance of the club. In recent years, he's focused on his passions on the preservation of historic archives for Malta and for all of Boathouse Row, and is a founding member of this Committee 50. And I have to mention that just this past weekend, Rick was recognized for his impact and lifelong contributions to rowing by being awarded Malta's most prestigious Dr. George Morton Illman Award. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rick, and we are going to start off our evening. Thank you all for being here. This is going to be fantastic.
Okay, well, thank you, Jen, for that great introduction. And I hope everybody can hear me. I'm unmuted. But I think is a lot. We're probably going to have maybe up to 200 people on this call tonight, and that is fantastic. Probably, I don't know everybody on the call, but I am sure that most everybody at one point in their careers, rowing careers, like myself, rowed in a Pocock boat, particularly a wood Pocock boat. And that's just an amazing group of individuals. We all have had the same experience with rowing in a wood boat. I think what we're going to learn tonight is a lot of interesting information about George Pocock and his brother Dick and the subsequent family through Jim Pocock, one of the descendants. I've learned a lot in the last few days and weeks preparing for this, of things I didn't know about. And when we get to Steve Chapin, Steve is going to put a really in perspective, as Jen said, what makes a Pocock, the uniqueness of the boat we all enjoyed. And when we get to Nicole Klein, she's going to really help us out and show what they're doing out in Seattle, which is fantastic, to preserve the Pocock legacy in his original shop and the UOW Shellhouse, where all these things happen, including the boys in the boat, where they were developed as a crew and eventually went on to Berlin. And finally, Judy Rance is Jen said, has a unique perspective of having known the seventh seat of that boat. It's going to give us a lot of great discussion and information about her dad. A lot of us had the privilege last night of seeing the movie here in Philadelphia, and I'm sure in the subsequent weeks all of you will be seeing it, and it's well worth your time. It's a good movie, and I think you're going to learn a lot, but I think we're going to really flesh that out for everybody tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Jim Pocock. As I say, Jim, and Jen has indicated, is a direct descendant of the Pocock brothers that came from England. And Jim, if you're ready, you can just work with Jen, as you know, to run through your slides and tell us what you knew about your grand uncle and your great grand and your grandfather.
Good. Thank you, Rick, and hi, everybody. And I want to start by saying I saw Sue Saul's name come by, and Sue is capable of giving this talk here, because Sue is we are second cousins, I believe. Also a grand niece of this guy George Pocock. So Sue, I don't think I've seen you for a couple of decades, so I'd love to get connected. But this is a picture of the five. You've probably all seen this picture.
Hi, Jim.
Hey, Sue. Let's get together after this. All right.
Of course.
All right. This is the picture of the guy that we're talking about tonight. And my understanding is he never really liked having his picture taken, so this was an unassuming moment. Next slide there. This is a picture of the Pocock family. George is in the middle in the back, and I'm judging this to be about 1898. George was born in 1891, and that's my great-grandfather and Sue's great-grandfather. Aaron Frederick Pocock went by Fred, and there's not a wife in this picture. These are his 5 children. George's 4 of these, including George's mother, died shortly after George was born. Lucy Vickers, I'm named after her. My name is James Vickers Pocock, and so that's Fred. And my grandfather is in the back, Dick Pocock, Richard, and George. And then that's Lucy, who is in the back. She also came with the brothers a little later than the brothers to Seattle. And or no, it's Julie in the back, Julia, and then Lucy is sitting down. And then the youngest is Kathleen, from another mother. So that's the crowd, and they were basically kind of a hard-scrabble family that didn't have much. Next slide, if we could. This is the Thames at Eton. Eton College is off to the right, back up the hill. And this is where Aaron Frederick Pocock built boats. He was the boatman for Eton College, the privileged prep school for English royalty families, where rowing was a required sport. Everybody had to row a single before they graduated. And so he built the boats, and he taught rowing, repaired the boats, and he taught his 2 sons, well, in fact, all of his kids, he taught them how to row. And as I said, they were not, they didn't have much money. You know, he was a widower. They lived in the boathouse, and that white bow window that you see there in the boathouse is where they lived. My understanding is that is now, you know, the movie's kind of famous in England, and they're now trying to put a plaque on there to make that you know, a famous National Historic Place. All right, so that's where George and Dick grew up. This is a picture of George at 17 years old, and he learned how to row at age 12 from his father. He won his first race at age 15, and his father entered him in a race when he was 17. This is a picture in Putney, and he was told, build the boat. No one's going to ask you how long it took to build it. They're just going to ask who built it. And so he built the boat. It was a mahogany hulled boat with ash washboards, the opposite color pattern of all the other boats that were out there. And entered the race. It was 58 entries, elimination heats down to the last 4, including the English champion sculler, a guy named Charles Harding. And it was a handicap race. George was off 3rd, just ahead of Harding. Let's go back, though, before I get to this one. We can go back to that previous. And he was off 3rd. And his father told him just before the start of the race, and there's a quote, Wag Harding knows this course blindfolded. It's his native part of the river. Keep him directly astern, and you'll never need to look around at where you're going. And all the scullers know that it's in that little glance over your shoulder where you lose a quarter of a second, right? So he never did. George won by less than a boat length, and he won 50 pounds. His father was absolutely elated and almost fell off the dock when he's embracing him as he's pulling up to the dock at the end of the race. And he's so elated. And then he tells his son why. He said, a week ago, I bet 5 pounds on you at 20-1 odds.
Wow.
So that was George. And this was taken in 1936 on the way home from the Olympics in Berlin. They went by Eton. It was the last time George saw his father. And an old boatman friend of his says, George, you know, we have that shell that you built when you were 17 still up in the racks. Would you like to take it out? And he said, boy, would I. And he writes about this in his memoirs. He had a delightful row. And this picture was snapped by his wife, Frances. So little history. All right, so this, I just want to throw a picture of my grandfather. This is Dick Pocock. He won the Doggett's Coat and Badge in 1910. And he was a tremendous, tremendous sculler. We'll go to the next one. This is just Susan, my great-grandfather, Aaron Frederick Pocock. He was the starter for the Doggett's Coat and Badge race for 40 years. His title was the Barge Master of the Company of Fishmongers. All right. Let's go on to the next one. These two brothers, they were apprenticed by their father, started building boats when they were 12. The apprenticeship lasted up until about their 21st year, when they then became, you know, official boat builders, master boat builders. But their dad was not politically savvy. He made some enemies. He lost his job at Eton. They really didn't have a future, and they had to decide, where are we going to go? And I'm going to stay on this slide for a couple of minutes here and tell the story about them coming over to this country. They decided they're going to go to Australia because they knew there was rowing there. But interesting family story. A few days before going to London to buy their ticket, there was a guy that came to their house named Charlie Young, and he was, in George's memoirs, fortified with strong drink. And George figured that he was fixing to propose to Lucy. So they were sitting around the kitchen table. They told him about their plans for Australia. And this guy, Charlie Young, told them about his brother, who was in British Columbia earning 10 pounds a week sawing trees. And the guy left. He never got up the courage to go talk to Lucy. and they discussed what they had just experienced. And someone at the table said, you know, drunken men often speak the truth. And on the basis of that conversation, they decided they were going to go to Canada. And so they booked passage on this boat, steerage passage, 15 pounds, about $75 today, Liverpool to Halifax, and they left in April of 1911. Quite interestingly, exactly 1 year later, April 1912, the Titanic set out from Liverpool, and the very same passage that they took, same route. But this boat made it. George was in an upper bunk down in steerage. He had an I-beam running over his head, just inches over his head, rats running up and down it all night long. And the first night out, they were all served very greasy sausages. And these two athletes looked at this and said, we're not eating this. And they just ate some hard bread and cheese that they brought. Everybody else in steerage got sick. And the next day they were up on the deck, leaning over the rail, heaving into the ocean. And George and Dick, very amenable guys. They made friends with some stewards on the boat. And the last day out, one of the stewards said to them, yeah, we give those sausages to everybody in steerage on the first day, and they all get sick. So we don't have to buy as much food for the trip. So they got to Halifax, they were hungry, and they took the train across to Vancouver. All right, so the next slide here, perhaps you know the story. They got their start after some odd jobs. Uncle George, first time he was ever using power equipment, he hit a soft piece of wood and he sent 2 fingers through a table saw and lost 2 fingers on his right hand. But his plan was to go all the way back to London in 1911 to race in the Doggets his 21st year. But because he lost his fingers, he didn't go. Big discouragement. But the first contract they had for building boats was 2 singles for the Vancouver Rowing Club. They also bought this floating wood shop, and that's where they started building racing shells on this continent, in that floating wood shop. And there's a lot of stories about how that thing would go up and down with the tides and get stuck in the mud. And I can amplify on a lot of these stories, but I'm just giving you high points. Here is where they met Hiram Conybeare, who rowed up to them. They thought he was drunk because he didn't know how to row, but he recruited him to go down to Seattle. So I'm going to just go to the next slide, Jen. And I'm skipping now 5 years. They got down to Seattle in 1912, or 1911 or 1912, up to 1917, started building boats. UW came to the notice of all the crews because they went to Poughkeepsie and they started beating people. But the boat building slowed down when the U.S. got into World War I. So 1917, they're in their shop. They're building boats. They don't have any customers. And the president of the University of Washington came into the shop with this guy. And he said, these are the boys that I told you about. And they had a newly finished 8 was on the racks. And this guy got down on his hands and knees. He looked up at the woodwork and he said, this is the kind of workmanship I'm looking for. And he gave them his card and said, come see me as soon as you can. He looked at the card, W.E. Boeing. And so they went to see him. Next slide is the first building that is the Boeing. This is the Boeing shop they went to. The next slide. And they met the guy that my grandfather always referred to as Bill Boeing. And this was his shop. This is actually, if you're in Seattle, you probably know that this building is actually the largest artifact in Boeing's Air Museum. Right now, you can go into that building and see what it was like in 1917. And Boeing had an order to build seaplanes. So the next slide is the seaplane. And he said, our problem is with the pontoons. they're always too heavy. They're collecting water. They're always breaking. Can you build 2 of these pontoons? And they looked at the plans and they said, yeah, it looks like a pretty simple project. We can do that. And Boeing said, how much would they weigh? And they did some calculation. They said about 115 pounds. And Boeing said to them, okay, if you can build me 2 of those at 115 pounds, I'll buy you each a new hat. And 3 days later, they called him to come to the shop, and Boeing called for a scale. The first one was 116 pounds. Second one was 114 pounds. But George's memoir, they never got the hats. So Boeing hired them, and their order was 150 pontoons. He had a contract for 100 planes, or for 50 planes. That was 100 pontoons, and then 50 extras. Gave them authority to hire the crew they needed. They hired 12 guys, and they built 2 pontoons a day. They had 150 of them done before the first airframe was completed. And Boeing was so impressed. He came in and inspected the work and loved it. And he asked George, who really, more than my grandfather Dick, organized the whole thing. He asked George to go into the final assembly plant and see what the problem was. He went in there and he just saw all sorts of system kind of errors, doing things wrong. And so at age 27, George Pocock was made the foreman of William Boeing's final assembly plant. He knew nothing about aviation, but he knew everything about fine woodwork and how to put it together. And so, so this is a job that he held for probably about 4 years. The next slide is, this is the pontoon shop. That guy on the farthest right is my grandfather, Dick, who was foreman of the pontoon shop, while George was foreman of the final assembly plant. And you can actually, if you go to the museum at Boeing, you can stand right in that very spot. They have this building still there. No pontoons, but you can stand there next to the equipment. Next slide. This is a big bomber that they made, and I put this in. My grandfather Dick, he's the tallest guy there. If you count in from the left, about number, yep, that's him. And then George is about 1, 2, 3. He's about 9 in from the right. He's got a dark fedora. So, yep, that's him right there. And this is the crew that built this plane. On the basis of, there's another story that I got a lot of stories. I've been told I got 12 minutes. I'm probably over time already, but I got a lot of stories. If you invite me to your boat club, I'll tell you more. After the war, a group from the government came to Boeing's shop, checking out all the airline manufacturers, and they didn't have any airplanes in there. All they had in the aircraft shop was 2 8-oared shells that these brothers had just finished. You know, they didn't have time. They didn't have anything to do with their time, so they just built a couple of 8s. And the head of the committee from Washington said, "Who built these?" And Boeing said, "Oh, these 2 guys I got working for me." And he said, "Well, you know, I wrote at Harvard. I've never seen workmanship like this." And on the basis of this committee, Boeing got got commissioned by the U.S. government for pursuit aircrafts, and that was the biggest start that Boeing had after the war, and they took off. So these brothers, I'm almost finished, Jen. These brothers had a tremendous career with Boeing and could have gone very far with him. This is 1921, but they wanted to build boats. And they went into a shop and they said, you know, we're, with respect and everything, we appreciate everything you've done for us, but we're going to quit. We're going to go back to build. But they didn't have any contracts, any commissions. They just said, okay, we're gonna do what we do. And Boeing said to them, I appreciate you guys so much. You've helped put our company on the map, and I cannot pay you what you're worth and what I owe you. And he paid them in Boeing stock, which was 1 year old. The company had just been public the year before. And this is a tale of two families. Sue's side of the family under George never sold their stock. My side of the family with Dick, he moved east to build boats for Yale, sold his stock, built a very fine house, lived a very comfortable life. But George, those of you know George in the history of the Bowen Company, he never really had to make money. In 1924, he sold an 8 for $1,250. In 1960, he sold the same 8 for $1,800. He didn't need money, and you probably know the story that he would often build boats and give them away, say, pay me when you can. His job was spreading rowing and the gospel of rowing around and the building of young men and women. So last slide, I'm just show, pull up, I think there's one more I got. This is a picture in 1965. My grandfather on the far right, and George, and this is their older sister, Julia. She was a little more sophisticated than she looks. She translated German works into English for possible Hollywood production. This was at a Memorial Day picnic. Every Memorial Day, George would come east with Francis, and we had a Memorial Day picnic at our house. And I put this in just to show you, George, look at him. This is a Memorial Day picnic, eating hot dogs and hamburgers, and he wears a shirt with cufflinks. All right. So he was a gentleman. All right. So as I say, a lot more family stories to tell. Sue Saul could probably fill in with a ton of them more. But we have a large program, and I'm happy to follow up with any and all of you any future time. So Jen, thanks a lot. Pass it on.
Thank you so much, Jim. We could listen to you all night long. We look forward, and just so everybody knows, we've in our pre-story hour conversations, we've realized that we could probably make 3 or 4 more story hours out of continuing some of these conversations, and we will plan to do that. So Rick, go ahead and move us along.
Yeah, thank you. And I think I heard you correctly, Jim, that George had lost 2 of his fingers early on in his career, and that just is amazing to me as a woodworker. He continued to do what he could do. And
right. And there's a lot of pictures of George around. I defy you to find a picture where you can see his right hand with just 2 fingers.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we're gonna move right along. Thank you so much, Jim, and we'll be back if you extend this. But we're now going to turn it over to Steve Chapin, and Steve is and he can explain more. But my understanding is that Steve, when Stan Pocock retired and got out of the business, he turned over all of the molds and tools and remaining wood that George had in his inventory to Steve, and Steve has been engaged for the last, I don't know how many years, Steve, but in repairing and building replicas to exact standards of the Pocock boats. So Steve's going to speak to what makes a Pocock that we've all rode in and what's unique about them and special. So Steve, I'll turn it over to you. Steve, are you there?
Just make sure you unmute yourself, Steve.
Steve, you need to unmute yourself.
How's that?
There you go.
We got you. Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Rick, and hello, everybody. I thought I'd start by showing this boat is a 1981 cedar Pocock teardrop single that it's very similar to the boat that Rick recently restored that was built in 1938, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
George designed this boat in the 30s for Joe Burke in a young rower out of Philadelphia. And he's continued to build this design all through the years up to 1981. Well, actually, at this point, I believe George died in 1976, and At that point, he had turned the company over to his son, Stan, who was running a crew of, I don't know, 10 to 15 people. And George continued to build the single. He loved doing that. So what's unique about this boat, I think, in the time that it was built, 1981, is that it was right during a revolution in materials in boat building, where composite materials were coming into the picture, and they were built lighter and stronger and faster, and but they were also built in a completely new way. So the old practice of building in wood was on its way out. You think about George, when he started building and apprenticing to his father, he was a third generation shell builder. So he taught his son Stan to build boats and moved it on to yet another generation. And this particular boat, 1981, would have been built by Bob Brunswick, who George hired in 1947 and worked side by side with George building all the boats. And so what was happening then in 1981, the writing was on the wall that wood was gonna phase out and everything was gonna be composite boats. And so over the years, one by one, they discontinued the various models of boats, the 8, the 4s, the quads, et cetera, until the last boat under production was this single, this teardrop single, and another model they called the standard single, built by Bob Brunswick. So we ask what's unique about Pocock's shell. Western red cedar that the planks are built out of grows abundantly in the West Coast here. And it's available in long lengths and wide widths, clear, of knots, tight grain, lightweight, just beautiful wood. So we're looking inside that boat that we just saw, looking aft toward the stern. Overhead are Carlin beams, about 10 inches wide at this point, and down below, heading off into the distance, the sugar pine keel, and then you can see some diagonal struts occasionally there. Those are ash dowels, smaller than the diameter of a pencil. So the unique thing about Pocock not only is the wood, but that it's a solid thickness of wood. It's not a laminate, and it's just one piece of wood from gunnel atop to the keel down below, book matched port and starboard. There are no frames or bulkheads that support the plank in between the gunnel and the keel. So you can see it's just freely floating there. There are a couple of bulkheads that define the footwell, but those are just sealed to the wood and not a structural joint to the hull. So that aspect, what we see here in the single, does carry on to pretty much all of the other designs, the bigger team boats. It's a fabulous piece of engineering and a work of art, light, strong, fast, elegant, and beautiful. So here we have Stan Pocock at the left and his good friend Frank Cunningham enjoying a little bit of quiet time in the door of my shop. So we fast forward a couple of decades from 1981 to about 2001. And at this point, Stan had sold the company to a family friend, Bill Titus. That was probably about 1985, and they remained good friends throughout. And there was a point when, in about 2001, where Pocock was looking at moving their factory, and they thought it was a good time to phase out the single, and Bob Brunswick would retire. At that point, I think he retired at about 54 years of service with the company. So it was all gonna end right there. Several generations of design and building and craftsmanship throughout the Pocock family, and transferred now to Bob Brunswick. And so it was Pocock's practice to burn and destroy all the apparatus of those designs when they phased them out, so that nobody would build a bad boat with Pocock's name on it. And but it came time with the single, and Stan had been aware of what I and some other folks in Port Townsend, where I live, were doing with older cedar Pocock shells, restoring them and rowing them. I started first with a pair, and then we got a hold of a 1948 Cedar 8, the Quinault, and we were just having a great time. And Stan loved what we were doing, and he thought that perhaps we could do something constructive with that apparatus that Bill Titus would otherwise destroy. So somehow he convinced him to do that, and Bill told me that, you want it, it's here at my factory, we've dismantled everything, you just come pick it up. Wow. So little did I know what all was there. It was probably 6 or 8 truckloads of stuff. And this is just a small part of what we're looking at.
Fuck me.
We're looking at steam molds in the foreground, cedar planks off to the left. We've got deck frames, strong back and stocks, and molds and jigs and machinery. Let's go to the next slide. So here I'm looking at some of the parts of the strong back. It just went on and on. So it was huge. But I guess I was undaunted, and I said yes. So Bob was retiring, and I was able to enlist his help to help me piece together all that stuff and get started building the boats. And I had a great time working with Bob. I really got to love him. So moving on to how the boats are built, and kind of what makes Pocock's unique is that George and Stan had worked out jigs for just about every part on the boats, and so they could be made in multiples by the crew, and they would race each other trying to build all the piece parts for the boats. And what we're looking at here is the single deck under construction. On the left is a jig with the gunnels and the Carlin beams getting set in place. On the right is a completed frame that serves as a pattern. for the process. Next slide. So here we're looking at the bow of the deck frame, still under construction. The pattern on the left, you can see a couple of cross spaces in the horizontal plane of the deck, and you can see the rower's bench. We're looking at the boat upside down here. That's how they built their boats, upside down. Next slide. So once that deck frame is complete, it gets inserted onto the stocks, which are secured to a strong back, and which is that 6x6 I-beam, 30-foot long I-beam bolted to the floor. So really secure platform. The keel has been laid now on top of the stocks, and you can see that stretching down the line. Overhead is a completed deck frame for the next boat. This particular boat is a heavyweight teardrop under construction. Next slide. A little close-up of the frame under construction. This is under the seat deck. The rower's bench is in place and the keelson is there. Interestingly, that slide that Jim showed early on of George working in his shop, he was standing over this very part of a single. And here we are, it's the same boat being built on the same jigs and stocks as, what would that have been, 60, 70 years earlier. Next slide. So at each end of the boat, inner stem blocks are fit and faired. These are sugar pine and spruce, and then ash dowels. So that looks like it's pretty much ready to go. Now it's time to start thinking about planking the boat. Let's go to the next slide. Western red cedar. This is a plank that came out of Pocock. It was probably cut, a tree felled in the 1970s. And George had stockpiled a lot of red cedar for the boats. And, this is one of those planks. It's a 2x14, 28.5 feet long, clear, vertical grain, this beautiful wood. So we pushed this through a resaw. This bandsaw came out of Pocock. It was a Stetson Ross. It was a fixture in their shop for decades. I've got it running, and what we do here is we slice off thin veneers of red cedar. Go to the next slide. So this is a completed cut, the first cut. And if you look carefully on the left side of this plank, I've got it clip clamped together, is the first cut. And next slide. There's the end of that plank. It's 12 inches wide, 28 feet long. And at this point, it's rough sawn, it's about 3/16 thick. So I continue to slice through this piece of wood, a 2x12, probably get 8 boats out of that. No, excuse me, 4 boats, 8 sets of planks. I thickness sand those down to 3/32 of an inch thick. And then we steam then those around a form. Here we've got Bob showing us how it's done. They're bent around a male mold, the very shape of the boat. Port side plank and starboard planks are, in this case, are done at the same time. Next slide. The completed plank gets pulled off the mold. And there it is. It's just literally a shell. It's a little bit oversized width and length, but at this point it probably weighs just 2 or 3 pounds. I've got port and starboard right there, and if you look in the background, I'm going to take it over and put it on the bench to the right. We'll go to the next slide. So another view from overhead. The completed steam bent planks are on the left, and on the right is the frame ready for fitting the planks. In the background, you can see a couple of completed shells. So I clamp and glue each plank to the frame. It's a tricky process where once I get both planks on there, I've got to make a center line joint where I overlap port and starboard planks and run a circular saw right down the middle, cutting through both of them. And it's the highest stress, riskiest procedure in the whole process. So once the boat's done, we pop it off the stocks. At this point, the boat, that single, probably weighs 18 pounds. And it's strong enough to hold a 200-pound rower. It's fabulous. So there's a whole lot more that goes into the process, and I don't have time to describe all that. But basically, what I'm doing here is sealing the interior of the boat with a couple coats of varnish. The decks get fitted with heat shrunk Dacron fabric and made translucent with a couple coats of varnish, and then trimmed out with yellow cedar washboards and cheeks and half round trim on the decks, and then it's done. There's the boat. Turns out it floats. A happy day. So here's a completed single. The iconic look of a Pocock is that western red cedar hull and the yellow cedar trim. And everybody who rode these old boats will remember these wooden clogs with leather uppers. And in this case, it's a red cedar sliding seat, tubular stainless riggers, and spruce oars. Next slide. The final day is the test drive. The owner, in this case, for this boat, is Don Costello out of Coos Bay, Oregon. Rows on a lake there. He rowed in college at Cal and continues to row to this day. And finally, the last slide, here's the first couple of strokes in his new boat. He was a happy guy.
All right. Well, thank you, Steve. This is unbelievably fascinating and how those things are built. And I think gives everybody a real appreciation of what goes into them. It's just not a simple process. A lot different than a fiberglass boat these days. It comes off a mold. And we all appreciated the workmanship that you and George and so forth did. So we're going to move. Thank you very much, Steve. That was great. And we're going to move right on to Nicole Klein. Nicole is working with Al McKenzie, who's on the call also, with the restoration and funding of the old Shellhouse in Seattle, where it was also an aircraft hangar, which Nicole will explain about. And it's also where George Pocock had his shop for many, many years within this building. And it's also where the crews had their boats and where they rode out of and trained all at the same time. And the thing that amazes me about this whole operation was that George Pocock and his team of 3 or 4 craftsmen turned out thousands of boats in an extremely small shop at the second floor of this building. along with all these young oarsmen. But what that created was a synergy between these young oarsmen who every day walked into this boathouse and trained. And at the same time, there was George Pocock building his boats. So he obviously had a lot of interaction, which Judy's going to discuss a little bit later. So I'm going to turn it right over to Nicole. And Nicole, if you can run through your presentation, that would be, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's a hard act to follow with everybody. So thank you for having me, and it's good to see all these familiar faces. I've been learning over the last 6.5 years, all of this. I'm not a rower by training. ASUW is Associated Students of University of Washington. It's student government, still here at UW, and they used to run the sports on campus. Love the eagerness. So there is a group on here that I think wants to talk about preserving historic buildings like boathouses. So this is something that I've definitely got a quick training on, and historic preservationists are just as patient almost maybe as Steve Chapin. I feel like they know that the purpose is bigger than all of the hurdles that you're going to experience, but it's worth it. And so this building is one of those. And if you go to the next slide, I listed sort of, I always say they're my children. So if you're a parent, you know you don't have a favorite, but this building has essentially 5 children. It was a canoe portage since time immemorial. That Montlake Cut shipping canal, that's famous raceway, it was man-made in 1916. So it was a canoe portage. So it's an archaeological site, which is fun with permitting, right? But it has meaning. People gathered there. Western red cedar was already there. It was a hangar from World War I, one of only 2 left. It, of course, housed rowing from 1919 to 49, and has George upstairs making all the racing shells in the world. And then after that, the part people lesser know is that it was a home and a canoe rental facility inside, as well as the home to 2 gold medals in sailing. So if you go to the next slide, this is a picture of the Montlake Cut and one of its final blasts. It dropped Lake Washington by 9 feet forever. And if you go to the next slide, when that happened, when the water left that area, it ended up being the land that the Shellhouse is built on. So literally the spot on this historic waterlines map we have, that's what it's called, is Carry a Canoe in the Chute Seed, which is Stuckwillish. So, and a beautiful part of this organically that grew out is, oh, back one, sorry, is the canoe that you see in these pictures. It ended up having a home inside of this big hangar because, as you know, it's like having a big attic. People put things in there. And this came to us, and it's sort of grew a purpose around it, which is, you know, there used to be canoes in this area and there aren't anymore. And we have a very active student body and faculty in Native history and heritage and culture, and a canoe family formed around it. This is a Western red cedar strip built canoe. It's about 800 pounds, 35 feet long, painted by a very famous local artist, Marvin Oliver, and his sister there. So we have formed a canoe family, UW Canoe Family, that has renamed itself the Shellhouse Canoe Family. And they probably won't be inside the building when we're redone because it's too hard to have this active boat movement, but they will be nearby. So you go to the next slide. It's just the pictures that show the area of the between the lakes, lake where you have Lake Union, Portage Bay, wonder where I got that name, and that sort of landlocked area that gets you over to Union Bay that leads to Lake Washington. That's where the blast happened. So you can go to the next slide. This is the World War I child. Now, to some of my volunteers and on this call, I know I have a couple of you, my historians, and we have someone from Boeing. This is a Navy hangar from World War I. There's only one other left, and it's in San Antonio, Texas, called Hangar 9. It's still standing. It's amazing on its own, and it is connected again to flight, which I think is a perfect introduction that Jim did at the beginning. This continued crossover between flying through the air and the water. The next slide. This is it under construction, which is Douglas fir beams, which are huge. If you come see the building, I mean, you can barely wrap your arms around them. And this is where it sits on the corner of campus, a really important spot to watch races go past, but also a really real estate-wise important spot if you're a football fan. This is where all the tailgating happens because Husky Stadium is right next to it. And it's just sitting there, like empty, no one using it. So we have quite the opportunity. Next slide. Of course, row. Oh, the next one. Sorry. These you can have. She'll send to you at the end, so you can dig deeper. But rowing. So this is the original apron for seaplanes that they're standing on, and that's a picture from the first national winning team. And then next to the coxswain there on the end is Coach Al Obrickson as a student athlete. You can see those hangar doors. They span 70 feet from the middle out to the wings. So you could turn one of those 8 sideways and come out the door, I guess, if you wanted to. But what a perfect primo spot to move into. Rowing has been around at UW officially since 1904 for men, 1907 for women. And they had moved around to different boathouses, sort of commandeering them. And that's what they did again here. They added steam, which they needed for showers. And it's still cold in there. But they also ended up needing it to lure Pocock to build his shop upstairs. And there he is down below, standing in the boat bays. Next slide shows just what happened there, which basically most people don't realize, yes, we have the 1936 team, but we also have a 1948 Coxed 4 that won gold, and we had the first national title for UW in any sport was 1923 in rowing, and 7 more. And if there was World War II in there, we probably would have more, but you know, it's pretty proud, humble building to have won all those titles and bred all those champions. Next slide. This is the Montlake Hut with stadium style seating. It was put together for, not for a rowing event, but for a boating event by the Shriners, but this was in 1936. So this is what it looked like to be on the cut. Today, you need a machete for blackberry bushes, but it still sloped very severely. And a lot of trees, and our bridge, our beautiful bridge that we love to go under, it's not painted white or looking this sparkly right now. So just looking back in time. Next slide. Pocock, of course. So he alone is, if I have a background in museums, I'm actually a duck from University of Oregon and grew up in Coos Bay. So that was fun to see. We had a rower in there. That this piece that he connects all of the stories. He worked with Western Red Cedar. That's where our canoes came from. He's an immigrant, a story that made it, kind of that all-American story of the dream. He has this connection with Boeing and flying. And then he trained and coached on the side while he was, you know, mentoring young people. And this connection with Cedar ended up being a lifelong passion that Judy will talk about with her dad. And of course, in the movie, in the book, you know, he is a central character that kind of grounds everything. He's a real person that stood in that space. And if you see the picture that on the bottom right is a rendering. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
That's the one slide back. That is just a rendering conceptually of what we hope to bring back the Pocock shop, so that it's a place where Steve or others that want to drive all the way down from Port Townsend and do repairs or work on shells, we can bring that space back to life, and put the cedar and the smells back in there, bring it up to code. So that's the heartbeat of the building still. Next. Since last phase of its life, it had a completely different front. If you notice, those doors are gone. There's 4 windows. That's the side with the house on it. The other side, they covered up the T shape, but there was an entry point for masts to go in and out for sailing. Next slide. The next slide shows the back of the building. And then this is the family that lived upstairs, which is just random to know about. I've met them, and they are, that's where they grew up and had memories and Christmases. And if you click on the mouse, you'll see the arrow. I made a little arrow so you can see the side of the building. You can still see the shape of the hangar wall there in the drywall. Pretty crazy. Next slide. Then the building was almost torn down. So by 1975, the UW didn't need it anymore, and the community saved it, put it on the National Register. So a big commitment to this project has been making sure that this is a not just a university-centered project, that it actually serves the community. The community is the one that saved it. It was built for the Navy. It housed so many different purposes over the years, and to open and activate it and bring it back to everyone is really important. Next slide. This is what it looked like when I took on the project. A lot of boats in there, 150 renters with a really great space on the water, but the doors stopped working. They only had one little door to go out of. And we decided with the book coming that it was time to do something with this historic space. So 2018, we filed to become a Seattle landmark, which has the most controls, but is essential to moving forward. Next. There's the book, which Judy will talk about. You can go forward a few on this one, I guess.
Oops.
So yeah, Dan and Judy, so she'll tell her story when we get there, but they saved this building. I wouldn't have a job. We probably wouldn't be talking if they didn't write that book. So big kudos to them and thank you. Next page. This is a timeline, a lot of going on there. 2017 was I was hired, so this has been my life, and everything about it has been this building. And the book just celebrated 10 years. We are at 18.25 million towards 18.5 million total. We have hired our design build team, local firms, Methuen and Sellon. We'll start our permitting and design, and that's about 1.5 years of work. And then we hope to go into construction and be finished by June of 2026 before FIFA World Cup. Of course, there's a movie inserted in there. You picked out George Clooney. That has been a moving target, as you all know. Some of you got to see the movie, but how to leverage this is pretty exciting because when you watch the movie, the only thing you're going to recognize about Seattle is the Shellhouse. They built it to scale. So next slide. This is an interior shot I took with my iPhone, but this is a piece of it that I want you to know about the inspiration that place can have, which is that it can have a certain power to ignite new ways of thinking. It can inspire you to work harder, do more, because this space has really done it all for us. And this is sort of the extra kick to what we do in this space that will be beyond, oh, you had a wedding in here. Well, why did you choose to have one there? Or you had a lecture, or you had a K-12 tour. All of these things will be different because they took place in a space like this. Next. So these are my big goals. There's a lot on there. It keeps me up at night. But the ones that this group might really like is the fact that we are trying to, I know Bill Miller, I saw you on the call, tempt U.S. Rowing and National Rowing Foundation to be the site for the potential Rowing Hall of Fame. There's a nice mezzanine on top of the old shower room that would have a beautiful view to Lake Washington and give us a really national pull for what has happened in that space. Next. These are a bunch of our donors. Some that you might like to pull out here, though, is that we did get a federal grant for $500,000 from Save America's Treasures. Once you're on the national registry, you can do that, and $3 million from our state, and our county gave us $850,000. But the big main donor, $5 million, was from a couple, Brad and Kathy Smith, who are not rowers. They're not from Seattle. They're not Huskies. They just love the book and felt like this is a building that's worth saving and will teach us. Yeah, I mean, so it broke all the rules, which I love. So we're really excited to be so close. Keep going. And then there's the Clooney effect. We don't need to play the trailer for us today. Can keep going. This is a shot of the Shellhouse being built. They used a 3D scan that we had on hand. This is before the doors are put on. Those are the actors in the same pose. These are our friends that we're going to know soon, Ulrichsen and George Pocock, not looking quite like Jim described in his pictures. Next. And then there's the finished Shellhouse with that big, huge deck. And you can see, I mean, they captured it perfectly. On the right is a picture of it in an action shot from the documentary. It's just beautiful to see. And I don't know if there's an Oscar for set design, but it's more well lit than ours, but it is just like you're stepping inside. Next. And these are the tags. So that's part of the story. And in the movie, those that watch it, you can see they got something a little weird there. But we raised $5,000 in 48 hours, the state of Washington did, to send our team to the Olympics, or Penn would go in our place. Sorry if Penn's on the call. But it was fair. And so these little tags were sold for 50 cents. And that's the majority of gifts that got to the 5,000. That's a lot of little tags in the middle of the Great Depression. So if you go to the next slide, is a fun little comic that shows, the Seattle Times and our paper were really part of that push. And so they are again. So we're in the middle of the very end of the campaign, and it's called Pull Together. What a great name. And it supports the Shellhouse. If you go to the next, it just started November 11th. It'll go till the 25th. Supports the Shellhouse, our men's and women's rowing program, or student scholarships, all leveraging sort of the magic of this story being born again. Next slide. Okay.
Sorry, Nicole, I had a hyperlink and
yeah, you're on. If you go back one, just for those that are super fans of Boys in the Boat, you won't be able to find, I don't think, MGM stuff, but our university bookstore does have an online way to get things. And you can order online. They have a bunch of Husky Crew stuff, and some of it Boys in the Boat centric, not just Husky. Then Mohai, which is our local big history museum, they have a really great, though small exhibit, because they only had 6 months to put it together, which is super fast. And it has a Husky Challenger, an actively rowed wooden 8. I believe that Stan and George both built, right? And was used in the documentary. So Dan Brown, of course, his words have helped shape everything, is still here in Redmond next to Judy. And this is a great quote that has also helped with this project, is knowing that hope is part of one of the elements of this story. And we're all in times of stress, that their story just reminds us of hope. And then the last slide, I don't know if we'll have time right now, is a 3D walkthrough tour that anyone can do online. And you can walk through the building if you're never gonna get to Seattle. And it has little targets on there, so you can learn more and uncover certain things. And I think probably most importantly, as we introduce the next person, maybe you can just try and get up to the Pocock shop, and then we'll get to Judy, right?
I'm fascinated by this.
Was not looking at
Nicole, you did
Okay.
You did fabulous. I don't know, can you still see this as I'm going through this building? Nicole can put the link
Yeah,
in the chat room for this 3D tour, but it's just amazing to get in here and really look at the space where the boat building was done. So I encourage you to go to this link and take a look around, and to imagine all these boats being coming out of this space. Nicole, thank you so much. Rick, you want to take it from there?
Sure. Excuse me. I think when you see the movie, everybody, you realize that the boathouse, or the Shellhouse, had a unspeaking role in the movie of extreme significance, because it's all tied with the tied together with the construction of the boats and with the young men who went through. So I think it's a very important part of George Pocock's story, that where he operated out of. This is where he interacted with all these young oarsmen. We're now going to turn our presentation over to Judy Rance, who is Willem, who is the daughter of Joe Rance, the number 7 oarsman in the Boys in the Boat in 1936, who has obviously, we're really grateful, Judy, for being with us tonight, who has a unique perspective on her father and all the activities he was involved in, the winning of the boat in 1936, but his early years, which was touched on.
Feel your forehead if you want me to.
Was touched on.
I don't think you're sick. I don't think you're that sick. You don't seem that sick to me.
Which Dan Brown, of course, captured in his book. So I'm going to turn it over to Judy, and she's going to go through this. So Judy, thank you so much, and you're on.
Thank you. I need to ask Jen a very brief question. It looked to me like when you had that listing up to the side, like this slide of Joe was no longer slide number 1. Am I right?
Oh no, can you see Joe now?
Yeah.
Yep, you're good. I put a placeholder in there. You're good.
Okay, so if I call out slide number 1 or slide number 2, they're going to be.
Yes, you're fine.
What I thought they were. Okay. I'm going to begin with a brief history of my dad's childhood to help you understand the psychological traumas that he underwent. Each one of these episodes occurred about 18 months apart until he got to Squim. And in slide 1, his mother died before his dad turned 4, and his father, unable to cope with his wife's death, fled to Canada and sent Joe alone back to slide number 2, Williamsport, Pennsylvania, to live with an aunt that he didn't know. His older brother later brought him back to live in Nez Perce, Idaho with him. And then his father came back down to Spokane, married, and built a house. And he brought Joe to live with him, slide 3. The house in Spokane burned down, and the family moved into housing at the Golden Ruby Mine in Idaho, where his father had been working. Not long after, Joe was banished from the family and sent to live with a school teacher, tasked with providing enough firewood and kindling to keep the stove burning in the schoolhouse and earning his food by working for the camp cook. Then the family moved to West Seattle to live with his stepmother's parents. And when his dad got a job with the Hama Hama Logging Company on Hood Canal, Joe was sent to live with a local family, which he didn't know. Slide 4. The family moved to Sequim, and his dad bought the Sequim tire shop where he could work and house the family above the shop. You can see the housing area up there. Later, he was able to buy some land outside of Sequim and begin building a house. Joe was 15 when the Great Depression hit, and it was that fall that the family packed up and left him. Thula, the stepmother, basically told his father that she was leaving and taking the other kids, but Joe was not to come with them. And Harry, his dad, could stay or come as he wished. So Joe, left with no family and a half-finished house at the beginning of the Depression, had a decision to make. Would he live his life as a victim or a survivor? And the choice he made was that he would be a survivor. He would make his own way and finish school somehow. But after spending his first 15 years being treated as disposable, with any trust in family or loyalty constantly crushed, he would never again allow himself to trust his future to anyone else. Slide 5. As his senior year approached, his older brother Fred again summoned him, this time to live in Seattle and come to Roosevelt High School, a quality school where Fred was in charge of the chemistry department. With spare time suddenly available to him, Joe joined the school gymnastic team, and it was there that the UW rowing coach, Al Ulbrichtson, discovered him doing giant circles on the high bar. Impressed with the height and muscle of this young man, Ulbrichtson went across the hall to the chem lab and asked the teacher who the student on the high bar was. "Oh," said Fred, "that's my younger brother Joe." "Well," said Al, "when he gets to the university, have him look me up and talk about crew." Slide 7. Oh, I'm sorry, slide 6. Yeah. So Joe arrives at the university, tall, well-muscled from the work he'd been doing, but damaged psychologically, attempting to compete in a sport which requires the ultimate in teamwork and trust. Slide 7. 1933 to 34, Frosh year. The freshman coach, Tom Bowles, finds Joe to be strong, but has definitely non-standard rowing form. Despite this handicap, he is named for the first Frosh boat, along with two boys that he feels comfortable with, Roger Morris and Shorty Hunt. These three will stay in the same boat for their entire 4 years. Not only do they win all their freshman races, they take the freshman championship race in Poughkeepsie, New York. Slide 8. 1934 to 35, sophomore year. Ulbrichtson is now Joe's coach. He is decidedly unhappy with Joe's inconsistent performance in non-standard form. He is trying to keep the guys from the freshman boat together, but as sophomores, he keeps taking Joe out of the boat. The boat slows down. He puts him back in. The boat speeds up. He wants them to be his varsity, mesmerized by the ease with which they won the freshman championship, but they keep letting the seniors beat them. They win the Pacific Coast Championship by a hair, but by the time they reach Poughkeepsie, Ulbrichtson has had it, and he demotes them to JV, naming the seniors as varsity. The seniors lose, and the demoted sophomores win the JV championship. Slide 9. Joe's rowing is really off this fall. This is 1935 to 36. He has lost Charlie McDonald, the nearest thing to a father that he's had in Sequim, to a logging truck accident. But also his stepmother, Thula, dies in November. His mind is not in the boat. Ulbrichtson keeps pulling him out, threatening him, cajoling him, and he finally turns to Pocock. Slide 10. Pocock calls him up to the shop, talks to him about his goals, his life, why he is rowing. He talks about the importance of teamwork and trust and fellowship with his boatmates. Slide 11. His understanding and persuasion finally touch something that Joe has kept hidden. He helps him focus and his rowing improves. Slide 12. Ulbrichtsen makes adjustments. Finally, he names his first boat, but it doesn't go like he thinks it should. He switches Joe into the boat at the number 7 spot, and the boat explodes with speed. He's found his Olympic team. They destroy Cal in the Pacific Coast Championship. Slide 13. They win at Poughkeepsie in a manner that crushes and demoralizes the competition. Bob Mock holds the boat back and doesn't start his drive until they reach the railroad bridge at the last mile. Slide 14. Bob finally turns them loose, and they not only make up the 2 lengths that they were behind, but win by open water. What Mock has done is basically show the others that the UW boat can start a drive with the 2,000-meter Olympic length left from 2 lengths behind and still pass everyone. Several schools didn't even come to try at the Olympic trials after that. Slide 15. The Huskies traveled to the Olympic trials at Princeton, New Jersey, and win them handily. As they are standing on the dock after the race in 100+ degree weather, they find themselves at the mercy of the chair of the U.S. Rowing Olympic Committee, Henry Penn Burke, who loves to give an extended speech. As Bob Mock stands holding one handle of the trophy, he finally gets fed up and gives a yank on the cup. And when it pops out of Penn Burke's hand, the boys calmly walk off the dock and leave Penn Burke talking. Later that evening, Penn Burke informs Ulbrichtsen that there is no money available to send the boys to Berlin, and that if the team can't come up with $5,000 in a week, he will send the Penn team because they came in second and have lots of money. Seattle raises the money in 48 hours, and the boys tour New York and relax on the New York Athletic Club's facilities on Huckleberry Island for about 2 weeks. Slide 16. They then transport the Clipper by truck to the USS Manhattan. They spend a good part of the day lugging the shell along the dock, desperately looking for a way to load the shell on the ship. They finally resort to shoving and hauling it up the mail chute, and then hoisting it up to the top deck. Slide 17. This is a group photo taken on the Manhattan. Note that George Pocock is on the left. He came along as the boatman. Ulbrichtsen is on the far right. The port and starboard substitutes are alongside, and the guys are on the stairs. Slide 18. Again, the guys take on the task of offloading the shell. They are not about to put its fate into anyone else's hands. If you look closely, you can identify a number of the people. George, of course, is supervising closely. Slide 19. This is a shot to get the feel of Berlin, crowded with natives and tourists and competitors and overwhelmingly bedecked with swastika flags, along with a few Olympic flags. Slide 20. The boys in the shell are transported to Grunau, where the water competitions are held. In the unloading process there, someone had punched a hole in the Clipper, which George had to mend. Note in this shot of Japan unwrapping their shells, Roger Morris has photobombed it. Basically, they had lost their rhythm on the voyage. They were rowing very poorly. They didn't impress the other countries. The Canadian coach was overheard commenting that they, quote, rowed as if they had bad livers. Slide 21. Don Hume was still sick, with what we now suspect was walking pneumonia, but he did row in the preliminaries, and they had to beat Great Britain to make the finals, and it took everything they had. Both teams broke the world record for 2,000 meters in that race. At least that gave them a day to let Don rest before the finals. The rest of the American crews didn't even make the finals. From George Pocock's memoirs, quote, the 6 other boats brought over for the American rowing squad were very, very old, and I thought them a disgrace. They were the worst in use by any country. Slide 22. For the final race, the Americans were assigned the worst lane. It was in the path of the most wind, and they missed their start because they didn't hear the starter. Slide 23. Rowing in the rain, fighting the wind and the chop, they were in last place at 1,000 meters and were fast becoming exhausted. At some point, Don Hume phased out and basically was unresponsive to the coxswain and rowing on autopilot. You don't make it up in a situation like that. It looked hopeless. Slide 24. At about 500 meters to go, Don suddenly comes back to awareness. Bob is yelling at him, and the stroke goes up and up and up. They are slightly in first place with about 40 meters to go when Bob sees both the Germans and the Italians start to surge. He knows the boys have given everything they've got. He knows they have to give more. Higher, higher, give her all you've got, he yells. And the stroke goes up one more time to 44 strokes a minute. And the boat surges over the finish line 0.6 of a second ahead of Italy. All three boats cross the line in the space of 1 second. Slide 25. The celebratory wreath is given to Bob and then passed back over the heads of the crew. Slide 26. This is the front of Joe's gold medal. Not shiny and new, but it has lived a rather tough life buried in a squirrel's nest for about 40 years. Slide 27. And finally, the boys at the podium in the Olympic arena, victors of a prize that they had been working for 3 years for. And Joe has experienced the ultimate inability to trust, forged in the fire of that last 40 meters. He returns home whole.
Well, thank you, Judy. This is fantastic. Wow, what a great presentation. And I'm almost ashamed to admit this, that Henry Penn Burke was president of the Malta Boat Club for over 20 years.
Yeah.
My club. And I'm kind of ashamed of that right now. After I didn't have to tell that backstory. I didn't realize that. So that's great information. We're going to finish up here with another quick story that I'm going to relate. Thank you so much, Judy. Thank you. Not only did George Pocock have a relationship with the boys in the boat and their shell, but around that same time in 1936, 1937, he struck up a relationship with our hometown favorite, Joe Burke. And George Pocock and Joe Burke, who became the Henley champion twice and didn't get to the Olympics because of 1940. And George exchanged information on the design of the boat that Joe eventually used and won in the Henley in 1938. And we actually have, thanks to Bill Miller, copies of that correspondence, which went on for 20 years. But in 1938, George and Joe Burke exchanged, and Joe was very specific with George as to what he wanted the boat designed and how he wanted it built. And I think what this illustrates is that George Pocock was willing to work with a young oarsman who was fairly new and was coming into his own, but give him information and exchange and listen to him as to what this young oarsman wanted to do. And not many boat builders would be willing to do that. And so I think it really speaks to George's tenure. And here's a picture which we believe is of George Pocock actually holding the shell, the teardrop shell that Steve Chapin referred to. We think this might be the boat that he built for Joe Burke to use in the 1938 Henley success over there. And then the final slide, Jen, here's Joe Burke, of course, winning the 1938 Henley in that boat, which was eventually disappeared for over 50 years after Joe left Penn, and was refound over in New Jersey and restored and brought back to the University of Pennsylvania Boathouse, which now hangs in the boathouse, being restored by yours truly. But I think it's a real testament to the beauty of Pocock's boats, that this boat is still available and shows the unique design that George Pocock made for Joe Burke and vice versa. So along with the Husky Clipper, which is also still in existence at the University of Washington, hanging proudly from their ceiling, we have two of the most vintage and renowned boats that George Pocock ever built, along with everything he did to build men and oarsmen and his continual coaching and so forth. So with that, I know we've had a full evening here for everybody, and I want to thank all the presenters profusely. You were just great and working with us. Jen, I think if you want to have a few minutes here, we can get some comments from our audience. We've gone a little bit longer than we want, but I think it's been worth every minute. So Jen, I'll turn it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Rick, for for pulling this together, as well as all of our speakers tonight. Jim, Steve, Nicole, Judy, Al, we didn't even get to you, and we know you are our full of knowledge. So we will lead off with you on our follow-up to this, to these stories. But we hope that we did just a piece of justice tonight to the stories that are here about George, but also capturing the glory of the Shellhouse and that crew, and George mentoring a number of oarsmen through the years. Does anybody have any questions? I'm looking through the chat room briefly. I see a lot of good information there. What I am going to do is make sure that I capture that information that's in the chat room and put it in the follow-up email, so everybody has those different sites that have been put into that chat room. You'll also receive the recording link that we'll hopefully have posted by tomorrow morning. And we encourage you to share it with others. Any quick questions? You can go ahead and unmute yourself if you do. Oh, I knew that was going to happen. I'm going to go to John. Shoot over.
I've sold a lot of Pococks to a fella in California that for TGI hanging in TGI Fridays. There must be dozens and dozens of Pococks, because I know I've sold 12.
We need to get those inventoried.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, it's like there they are. They're all hanging there, rigged. $2,000 a piece was what they paid. Has anybody been in a TGI Fridays lately?
Actually, it's interesting you bring that up, because there was recently out in Detroit boat club, or they were somebody who was driving by a TGIF Fridays, and they drove by the back of the TGIF Fridays, and there was a Pocock forward shell ready to go into the dumpster. And luckily, somebody recognized it and got a hold of the Detroit Boat Club, and they have saved that from oblivion. Jim Dietz and I were talking a few weeks ago about the need to call TGF Fridays and see how many boats they might still have left in their inventory. And we were surprised to learn, Jim, I forget the number, but I think there's 400 TGIF Fridays around the country. So I think that's another task we'd like to get involved and get a hold of the corporate headquarters or all those list of people and call them and see how many there are still left. Because you're absolutely correct. Fridays was buying them left and right and putting them in their restaurants. And unfortunately, many of them probably have been lost. So we don't have an inventory of that. But
I'll try and track the guy down in San Diego that I worked with.
That would be great, John.
Yeah.
I think was Chuck. Were you trying to ask a question?
I wanted to add something. I'm
Yes.
Rick Stellick's doubles partner, a member of Malta, but I live in Ventnor now, and I'm rowing out of the Viking Rowing Club here in Ventnor, and a moderator for Holy Spirit High School, a priest named Father D'Amico, back in the 50s and 60s, rowed a Pocock single. We have that Pocock single now mounted in the boathouse. It hasn't really been fully restored, but it was cleaned up. We have a small kind of a meeting room there, and we mounted it just this past year. I've taken some pictures of it. Rick knows I've shared them with him. So there's a Pocock single down here.
Wow, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Chuck.
I'm
looking at. Oh, go ahead.
There's also one PGRC, Philadelphia Girls Rowing Club, which was recently, it was named after the first woman Commodore, Liz Bergen, and is now hanging in their boathouse is a vintage wood Pocock single. So beautifully preserved. So they're out there. Go ahead, Jen. Sorry.
I love the things that people are adding into the chat room. It's wonderful. John Leonard had a question wanting to know, because John also saw the movie last night, right? Did Joe marry his sweetheart from the movie? Was it Joyce, right? Judy? Are you going to give us a happy ending, or?
Yes, I give you a happy ending. They had to go 2 extra years to the university. He would have graduated in 37. That would have been 4 years. But because the rowing turnout times was the same time as the chemistry lab times that you have to take if you're going to be a chemical engineer, and you have to take them in order. And so they had he had 2 extra years that he had to go, and so Mom just took the 2 extra years along with him because she loved studying. She loved to learn stuff. And on the same day that they graduated, which was June 10th of 1939, that evening they got married. And they were married until Mom died in 2002.
Wow.
Judy, I didn't want to presume, Judy, but she is your mom. Okay, that's cool. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Could I just
Great
say
happy
something,
ending.
Jennifer?
Thank you.
Sure, please.
June 10th, that's a good anniversary for us.
I just want to add a comment. Coming in from England, former Scottish international, always loved rowing, loved the book, loved the PBS. Debates among my friends now are whether George Clooney can ever make a good film again. It's been a long time since he made a good film. I haven't seen it yet. This is such a great story. I am so hopeful.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. John, you have your hand up? Did you have another question, John Leonard? No, you're good. Okay. Anybody else? Final questions? There was something in the chat room which we were going to talk about, and I think we missed, about how the 8s were taken out of George's shop. And if you go and you look on that 3D the website of the 3D version of the shop, you can see windows to the left where they were slid out. But if anybody, Steve or Jim, do you want to speak to that? I think Steve might have.
I could give it a try.
Okay.
What I understand is that they figured that at the very, I think it would be the west end of the shop, there's a couple of windows that are kind of low towards the floor. They opened those windows or took them out and basically extracted the 8 out those windows at a second floor level, and then had the UW crew outside ready to catch it. And exact details of that, I think, are kind of lost to history.
Like the gold medal being in a squirrel's nest for years. Is that another part of lost history?
Yeah.
Is that true, Judy?
That's
Yes?
true.
Wow.
That's true. I never saw that medal until about 1973 or 4. All of my childhood, all of my early adulthood, it was just gone. And it wasn't until Dad started re-roofing the roof that and taking the shakes off that they found it.
Judy,
It's amazing.
Judy, I remember.
What? Wait a
Oh,
minute.
Jim, you're on mute.
Yeah, there we go. Judy, I remember you telling me that one of Joe's prized possessions, though, other than his gold medal, was his shirt off the back of the German number 7, and you showed me that. So he's got the jersey, the signet with the swastika right on the front.
Right.
That
And
is,
the German rower's name on the label in the back of the shirt.
and that's in Judy's possession. It's never been washed since before the race in 1936.
Right. I thought about that, but I was told you don't do that to something that's a historical thing. You don't wash it. It's more valuable if it's got like the sweat and the blood and whatever all mixed.
Oh yeah, I was making a respectful comment, Judy.
That's awesome.
Aren't they writing a story about that Germany?
About
A
Germany?
book about that German 8 that came in.
Oh,
Anybody heard about that?
No,
I believe it's already been done.
Okay.
On Hear the Boat Sings, they had a great story about that 8 and how it came about.
Okay. I should have read that. That's a great website, by the way.
Great.
tremendous.
Yeah, I'd like to mention there's another book out there called 6 Minutes in Berlin. If you haven't read that, it's a wonderful book by Michael Sokolov up at the University of Maine, which looks at the whole subject matter from a slightly different perspective, but it has a lot of great information in there, similar to Dan Brown's book. But it gets in depth on certain things like the media coverage of the whole event, but has a lot of detail. So if you want to read another book about the boys and the vote, also look at Michael Sokolov's book, 6 Minutes in Berlin.
Amazing.
Hey,
All
Rick,
right, folks.
Jen, somebody can hear me. Rick, Jen,
Yes, we can hear you, Al. We can hear you.
Rick,
Yes,
I don't know whether you can hear me or not.
we can.
We can.
And my iPad's dead. I'm working on second edition of George Pocock's memoirs, The Family, self-published. So if people are interested in reading his story and his words, they can reach me. I think Nicole posted my address on the chat list. And Stan Pocock also produced a book called Way Enough. That's his story as well. And that's another one that hasn't been readily available. So, and then final note, we found through Nicole contact in Vancouver, Washington, that has a Pocock single from 1925. So this boat's almost 100 years old. It'll be gifted to us, once the museum is completed. So it'll be kind of the centerpiece for upstairs.
That's amazing.
Point out too that Al has been collecting all things Pocock memorabilia, which are going to be enclosed or included in the shop recreation in the Shellhouse. So thank you, Al, for doing that. But he's been saving all those things which are going to recreate George Pocock's shop in the Shellhouse as part of the restoration process, as I understand it.
So fun.
Jennifer,
Yes.
it's the other John Schoonover. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hey,
Yes.
how you doing, Gardner?
Yes, I can hear you, Gordon.
Yeah, Gardner Cadwallader.
I
I
see.
want everybody to know there's a new book going to come out sometime soon about Joe Burke, written by, believe it or not, a Harvard guy. Anybody know about this? His name is Woodhouse.
Ed Woodhouse, he's on tonight.
Yeah. It's just the concept is so interesting. He said that his times racing under Harry, he learned so much about Joe, and the two of them were quite similar in many ways. So he's been interviewing a number of us, probably some of you here, and going to write a book about Joe Burke. So that should be the next one on our reading list when it comes out.
Wonderful.
And I'm not John Schoonover, even though I like John Schoonover very, very much. I'm not John Schoonover.
That's fantastic. No, thanks for that. We'll keep us updated on that one, Gardner. And honestly, this is why we started these story hours, so this community could connect and share. It's about recording these stories as well before they disappear, but also that we can make these connections. And ultimately, one of our goals as a committee is to kind of organize this effort for all these physical repositories and kind of mini museums that are happening throughout the country, but to connect them and maybe to create an organized digital archive that everyone can access well into the future. So more on that, but we thank you all for being here this evening. This was more than we could ever imagine, and our presenters gave us so much great information and presented it so well. So we thank each and every one of them, and we hope to have you guys back again, and we'll delve into more depth in some of these stories. Thank you all. And I'll send out a follow-up email, and I'll try to include as much information as I can. Again, you can always reach out to me, and I'll try to connect you with who you're looking for. Okay. Thank you all. Be safe.
job, Jen.
Be well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, everybody else.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jen.
Welcome.
Night.
Way enough.
Good night.